June 22nd, 1941. Sunday morning, 3 a.m. At the western borders of the Soviet Union, 3 million soldiers, thousands of tanks and aircraft wait silently. In a few hours, history's largest military operation will begin. Its name, Operation Barbarossa. Friends, the story I'm telling you today is one of the most critical turning points of World War II. Hitler's greatest dream and his greatest mistake. 3 million soldiers, 3,600 tanks, 2,700 aircraft, 7,000 artillery pieces. All for a single goal: destroy the Soviet Union in 3 months. But there's a problem in this story. Hitler doesn't know how many reserves Stalin is holding. He hasn't calculated how cold the winter will be. And most importantly, he has underestimated the Soviet people's will to resist. This operation is the beginning of the Eastern Front, which will last 4 years, the first step of a war that will lead to 25 million deaths. So why did Hitler attack the USSR? How did the plan work, and why did it fail? If you're ready, we're heading to the summer of 1941, right into the middle of the world's largest land war. Let's begin. First, we need to go back a bit. The year 1939. Europe is on the brink of war. Hitler wants to invade Poland but doesn't want to fight on 2 fronts. He needs to be secure in the East. August 23rd, 1939. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union sign a shocking agreement, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, officially the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. 2 ideological enemies, fascism and communism, shake hands. But this pact contains secret protocols, a plan to divide Eastern Europe. Poland will be split in 2. The Baltic states will enter the Soviet sphere of influence. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. On September 17th, the Soviets attack from the east. Poland falls in 36 days. The 2 great powers share the spoils. But this friendship is only for show. Hitler sees this pact only as a tactical maneuver. In his 1925 book, Mein Kampf, he wrote about his dream of settling in the East, the idea of Lebensraum, or living space. He viewed Slavic peoples as subhumans, and communism he defined as a Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy. Summer of 1940. Hitler defeats France in 6 weeks. He thought he would defeat England too, but the British were resisting. Churchill, in his blood, toil, tears, and sweat speech, declared they would continue fighting. Right at this moment, some of Stalin's moves are making Hitler uncomfortable. In June 1940, the Soviets demand Bessarabia and Bukovina from Romania. This region is very close to Germany's vital oil sources. For Hitler, this is the breaking point. In November 1940, Molotov comes to Berlin. Hitler offers an agreement over the Balkans and Turkey, but Molotov insists on demands over Finland and Bulgaria. The talks reach a deadlock. Hitler has now made his decision. He will attack the USSR. On December 18, 1940, Hitler signs Directive No. 21, code name Barbarossa. The name comes from Redbeard Frederick Barbarossa, who tried to establish the Holy Roman Empire in the 12th century. And drowned in Anatolia. Hitler compares himself to this legendary emperor. Operation Barbarossa's plan was based on Germany's famous blitzkrieg tactics. Fast, surprising, like lightning. Surprise the enemy, encircle, destroy. The plan was this: 3 army groups will attack simultaneously from 3 directions. First Army Group North, under Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb's command. Objective: Leningrad. Passing through the Baltic states, capture Russia's northern capital. This was the cradle of the Bolshevik Revolution. Its symbolic importance was immense. Second Army Group Center, under Marshal Fedor von Bock's command. This was the strongest group. Objective: Moscow. 2nd Panzer Group and 3rd Panzer Group will advance together with infantry. Moscow was both a political and transportation hub. If Moscow fell, the USSR would collapse. 3rd Army Group South, under Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt's command. Objective: Kiev and Ukraine. This region had agricultural lands and mines. Also, the route to the Caucasus passed through here. The total force was incredible. 153 divisions, 3.6 million soldiers, 3,600 tanks, 2,700 aircraft, 7,000 artillery pieces, the largest invasion force in history. Hitler and his generals thought they would defeat the Soviets in 3 months. "We just need to kick in the door," they said. They were confident the Soviet army was weak, based on its performance in the Finnish War. But the plan had a weakness: logistics. The German army would fight in a country 3,000 kilometers deep. The roads were bad. The railway gauges were different. And winter was not taken into account. On the Soviet side, the situation was different. Stalin knew an attack was possible, but he couldn't predict when. Intelligence was warning him, but Stalin thought Hitler wouldn't attack them before finishing off England. "He can't attack us without finishing England," he thought. The Soviet army was ready to defend with 2.9 million soldiers, 10 to 15,000 tanks, and 8,000 aircraft. But these forces were scattered along the front, and many tanks were old models. The command structure had also been weakened by Stalin's purges. Between 1937 to 1938, during the Great Purge, 30,000 officers were executed or arrested. On the morning of June 22, 1941 at 3 o'clock, German artillery opened fire. The Luftwaffe attacked airfields. 1,800 Soviet aircraft were destroyed on the ground on the first day. Operation Barbarossa had begun. The first days looked like a complete German victory. Blitzkrieg was working perfectly. Panzer divisions were advancing in coordination with infantry. Soviet lines were being breached. Encirclements were being created. The Battle of Bialystok-Minsk was the first major clash. It began on June 22 and ended on July 9. The 2nd and 3rd Panzer Groups encircled 324,000 Soviet soldiers around Bialystok and Minsk. This was one of history's largest encirclements. General Heinz Guderian, commander of Panzer Group 2, was the leader of the advance. "Speed is everything," he said. Tanks must not stop. Infantry was trying to catch up from behind. The Soviet command structure was in panic. Stalin was in shock in the first days. On the evening of June 22, he said, "This is a provocation." But in the morning, he saw the reality. On June 23, general mobilization was declared. General Georgy Zhukov was appointed as defense commissar. Zhukov had an extraordinary ability to predict enemy moves in advance. But in the first weeks, there wasn't much he could do. The armies were scattered. Communication was broken. In July, the situation became even more dire. The Battle of Smolensk began. It lasted from July 10 to September 10. This was the gateway to Moscow. Another 673,000 Soviet soldiers became prisoners. But here, something began to change. Soviet resistance was hardening. The German advance was slowing down. Tanks were breaking down. Roads were covered in mud and dust. Supply lines were stretching. Hitler made a strategic decision. Instead of Moscow, he would first take Kiev and Leningrad. His generals objected to this. Halder, Bock, Guderian all said Moscow should be the priority. But Hitler didn't listen. Ukraine's agricultural lands and resources, Leningrad's symbolic value, were more important to him. This decision is seen by historians as Barbarossa's turning point, because this diversion delayed the advance. It bought time for the Soviets, and winter was approaching. On the southern front, Marshal Rundstedt was advancing. Objective: Kiev, Ukraine's capital, defended by 665,000 soldiers. The Battle of Kiev lasted from August 23 to September 26. The 1st and 2nd Panzer Groups encircled the city. 665,000 Soviet soldiers became prisoners. This was the largest encirclement victory in military history. Hitler was drunk with victory. "The world's greatest battle," he said. But the price of this victory was heavy. Time had been lost. August was ending. They still hadn't set out for Moscow. On the northern front, the situation was different. Leningrad was completely surrounded on September 9th, but the city was resisting. The Germans didn't want to fight street by street. Hitler said, "We will raze Leningrad to the ground. The city will be erased from the map." But the people of Leningrad did not surrender. The 900-day siege had begun. Winter came, food ran out. People were dying of starvation. More than 1 million civilians lost their lives. But the city did not fall. From the other side of the Volga River, across the ice, food and ammunition were transported. This route, called the Road of Life, became the city's salvation. At the end of September, Hitler finally made the Moscow decision. Operation Typhoon would begin. Army Group Center would march on Moscow. But now it was September. Winter was at the door, and the Soviets had gained 6 months. New divisions had been formed. Zhukov was organizing the defense. September 30, 1941. Operation Typhoon began. 1 million German soldiers, 1,700 tanks, 19,000 artillery pieces were advancing toward Moscow. At first, the Germans advanced quickly. New encirclements were created at Vyazma and Bryansk. Another 673,000 Soviet soldiers became prisoners. Moscow was 160 kilometers away. Stalin considered leaving Moscow. A train was prepared, but Zhukov said, "We will stay and fight." Stalin stayed. On October 19th, martial law was declared in Moscow. Civilians began digging trenches. But then, nature intervened. On October 6th, rain began. The Rasputitsa, the season of mud. Roads became impassable. Tanks sank in the swamp. The German advance stopped. Then the cold came. In November, freezing temperatures began. German soldiers were still in summer uniforms. Winter clothing was stuck on the supply lines. Engines wouldn't work. Weapons froze. People were dying of cold. December 5, 1941. The Soviets launched their counteroffensive. Zhukov used fresh divisions brought from Siberia. These divisions were there against a possible Japanese attack. But intelligence showed the Japanese wouldn't attack. The Germans were in shock. They began to retreat. Hitler forbade retreat. "Stay in your positions and fight to the end," he said. He dismissed or retired 35 generals. In December, the Germans were stopped 160 kilometers from Moscow. They had suffered 2 million casualties. Operation Barbarossa had ended without reaching its objectives. The Soviet counteroffensive continued. In January 1942, the Germans retreated 200 kilometers. For the first time, the Nazi army had been pushed back. The casualties of Operation Barbarossa were horrifying. In 6 months, more than 2.5 million people died. This was equivalent to the 4-year casualties of World War I. German casualties: 186,452 dead, 655,179 wounded, 36,000 missing. More than 1 million total. 2,872 aircraft, 2,735 tanks, 104 assault guns lost. Soviet casualties were much heavier. More than 3 million soldiers became prisoners. Most of these died in German camps from starvation, cold, and disease. More than 1 million soldiers died. More than 4 million total casualties. But the Soviets had not lost the war. Factories had been moved behind the Ural Mountains. Every day, new tanks and aircraft were being produced. Zhukov and other commanders had gained experience. For Hitler, this was the first major defeat. "We will just kick in the door," he had said. But the door turned out to be an iron door. The war that would end in 3 months would last 4 years. The failure of Barbarossa changed the course of World War II. Germany now had to fight on 2 fronts. The Soviets in the east, England in the west. In 1944, the US and Britain would land in France. After the victory, Stalin said, "Barbarossa was the Germans' greatest mistake. They bought us time, we waited for winter, and then we defeated them." But the price of this victory was heavy. 25 million Soviet citizens lost their lives in this war. The bloodiest war in world history was fought on the Eastern Front. And that, friends, was the story of Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's greatest dream and his greatest mistake. It started with 3 million soldiers, ended with 2 million casualties. This operation teaches us many lessons. First, no plan can replace reality. Hitler and his generals thought blitzkrieg would work everywhere, but Russia's vastness, its winter, and the Soviet people's resistance were not taken into account. Second, logistics is half the battle. The German army was not planned to fight in a country 3,000 kilometers deep. Roads, railways, winter clothing, all were lacking. Third, the human factor. Stalin's purges had weakened the Soviet army, but commanders like Zhukov organized the resistance, and the Soviet people gave their lives to defend their homeland. Barbarossa was the turning point of World War II. Germany didn't lose here, but here it lost its chance to win. The next 4 years led to the deaths of millions. Stalingrad, Kursk, Berlin. All were continuations of Barbarossa. Today, it's important to remember this history, because these wars shaped our world. The Cold War, Europe's division, NATO, and the Warsaw Pact. All were consequences of this war. I hope this video helped you understand Operation Barbarossa. If you liked it, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next video. Goodbye.